The morning sun barely touched the ancient stone walls of the palace when something unusual began to stir within its corridors. Camilla had always valued her privacy above everything else. Her private chamber was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the suffocating duties of royal life. The heavy oak door with its golden handles remained locked from the inside most mornings, and the household staff knew better than to disturb her before noon. Today felt different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that made the servants whisper among themselves as they went about their duties. The head of palace security, Commander Harrison, had received an anonymous letter 3 days ago. The contents of that letter had kept him awake every night since. It spoke of secrets, of betrayal, of things happening behind closed doors that could shake the very foundation of the royal household. Harrison was a loyal man who had served the crown for 30 years. His gray hair and weathered face told stories of dedication and sacrifice. But loyalty had its limits, especially when national security might be at stake. The letter claimed that Camilla was meeting someone in secret, someone who had no business being in the palace. The writer suggested these meetings happened in her private chamber, away from prying eyes and security cameras. At first, Harrison wanted to dismiss it as gossip or malicious lies. The palace was full of people who envied those in power. But then came the second letter, and with it photographs. They were grainy and taken from a distance, but they showed a figure entering a side entrance of the palace late at night. The same entrance that led directly to the private wing where Camilla's chamber was located. Harrison knew he had to act, but approaching royalty required delicacy and proper authorization. He took his concerns to the king's chief advisor, Lord Pemberton. The old lord listened carefully, his fingers drumming on his mahogany desk as Harrison presented the evidence. Pemberton's face remained unreadable, a skill perfected over decades of political maneuvering. After a long silence, Pemberton made a decision. They would investigate, but they had to be certain. If this turned out to be nothing, heads would roll for the invasion of privacy. If it turned out to be something serious, they needed proof. He authorized Harrison to assemble a small team and conduct a surprise inspection of Camilla's chamber. It would happen tomorrow morning when she least expected it. That evening, Camilla dined alone in her chamber as she often did. She preferred her own company to the forced conversations at the grand dining hall. Her meal was simple but elegant, prepared exactly how she liked it. As she ate, she gazed out the window at the palace gardens below. The roses were in full bloom, their red petals like drops of blood against the green grass. She had a secret, yes. Everyone had secrets. But hers was different. It was personal, deeply personal, and she had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. The palace was a fishbowl where everyone watched everyone else. Privacy was a luxury that even royalty struggled to maintain. She had thought she was careful, that she had covered her tracks well enough. After dinner, Camilla spent the evening reading in her favorite chair near the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and she found comfort in their warm glow. At exactly 10 o'clock, as she did every night, she dismissed her lady-in-waiting and locked the door behind her. What happened next was her business and hers alone. The night passed quietly. The palace settled into its usual routine of night guards making their rounds and servants retiring to their quarters. But in a small office near the security center, Commander Harrison and 3 of his most trusted officers were finalizing their plans. They would move at dawn when Camilla would be least prepared. Morning came with a gray sky that threatened rain. The palace woke slowly, but Harrison's team was already in position. They stood outside Camilla's chamber, their hearts pounding with a mixture of duty and dread. Harrison raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, announcing his presence and authority. Inside the chamber, Camilla jolted awake. The knocking was insistent and official. Her heart raced as she quickly looked around the room. Everything had to appear normal. She grabbed her robe and moved toward the door, her mind racing through possibilities. Who would dare disturb her at this hour? Had something happened? Was there an emergency? Harrison's voice came through the door, formal and unyielding. He identified himself and stated that he had authorization to enter her chamber. The words hit Camilla like ice water. Authorization? To enter her private space? This was unprecedented. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle, but she forced herself to remain composed. Royalty did not show fear even when terrified. She opened the door slowly, her face a mask of controlled indignation. Harrison stood before her with 3 uniformed officers, all of them avoiding direct eye contact. The commander's face was grave as he explained that they had received credible information regarding a security concern involving her chamber. They needed to conduct an immediate search. Camilla's mind raced. A security concern? What did they know? How much had they discovered? She stepped aside, her chin held high, and allowed them to enter. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her panic. As the officers spread out through her chamber, opening drawers and checking closets, Harrison remained near the door, watching her carefully. The chamber was lavishly decorated with antique furniture and priceless artwork. Heavy curtains blocked out most of the morning light, creating an atmosphere of intimate seclusion. The officers moved methodically, professional but thorough. They checked behind paintings, under the bed, inside the wardrobe. Camilla stood frozen in the center of the room, her knuckles white as she gripped her robe closed. Then one of the officers called out. He had found something behind a decorative screen in the corner of the room. Harrison moved quickly to see what had been discovered. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had dreaded, the moment when everything would come crashing down. The walls she had so carefully built around her secret were about to crumble, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Behind the ornate screen, the officer had discovered a hidden door. It was cleverly concealed, built into the wall itself and painted to match the surrounding paneling. Only someone looking very carefully would notice the faint outline of hinges and a small keyhole. Harrison's eyes widened as he examined the door. This had not been part of the original palace blueprints. Someone had gone to considerable effort and expense to install this secret entrance. Camilla felt her legs weaken, but she refused to sit down or show any sign of distress. She had been trained since childhood to maintain composure under pressure. Royal blood meant never letting others see you break. But inside, her thoughts were chaotic. She had paid a fortune to have that door installed, bribing contractors and palace staff to keep quiet. She thought it was undetectable. She was wrong. Commander Harrison turned to face her, his expression a mixture of disappointment and professional duty. He asked her directly about the door, when it was installed, and who had access to it. Camilla could have denied knowledge of it, could have claimed it was there before she moved into this chamber. But lying would only make things worse when the truth inevitably came out. She chose her words carefully, admitting that she had the door installed for privacy reasons but refusing to elaborate further. Privacy reasons were not good enough for Harrison. His job was to protect the royal family and maintain security throughout the palace. An unauthorized entrance was a serious breach, regardless of who had ordered its installation. He informed Camilla that they would need to see where the door led and who had been using it. She had no choice but to produce the key from a jewelry box on her dresser. The key was small and silver, worn smooth from frequent use. Harrison took it from her trembling hand and inserted it into the lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, too smoothly, indicating recent and regular use. The door swung open silently, revealing a narrow corridor that had been carved through the thick palace walls. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically, illuminating a passage that stretched about 20 feet before turning sharply to the right. 2 officers entered first, their flashlights cutting through the dimness. Harrison followed, leaving 1 officer behind to keep watch on Camilla. She stood frozen in her chamber, listening to the footsteps echo through the hidden corridor. Her mind raced through scenarios of what they might find, how she could explain it, what consequences she would face. The minutes felt like hours as she waited. The corridor led to a small room that had been furnished with surprising comfort. There was a sofa, a small table with 2 chairs, soft lighting, and shelves lined with books and personal items. But it was the photographs on the walls that stopped the officers in their tracks. They showed Camilla in casual clothes, laughing and relaxed in ways the public never saw her. And in most of the photographs, she was not alone. Harrison studied the images carefully. The person with Camilla in these photos was not who he expected. He had prepared himself to discover evidence of an affair, perhaps with a foreign agent or someone who posed a security threat. Instead, the photograph showed Camilla with a woman, someone who appeared to be close to her own age. They were embracing in some photos, holding hands in others, looking at each other with unmistakable affection and tenderness. The commander felt a wave of conflicting emotions. This was not a security threat in the traditional sense, but it was still a massive secret that could create scandal and controversy. The royal family's image was carefully controlled, and this revelation could cause significant damage. He needed to report this to his superiors, but he also felt an unexpected sympathy for Camilla. Everyone deserved to love and be loved, even royalty. Back in the chamber, Camilla knew from the prolonged silence that they had found the room. She knew they were seeing the photographs, the evidence of her carefully hidden life. Part of her felt relief that the burden of secrecy might finally be lifted. But the larger part felt terrified of what would come next. Judgment, scandal, possibly removal from her position and home. Everything she had worked for could disappear. When Harrison emerged from the corridor, his face was unreadable. He asked Camilla to sit down, his tone slightly softer than before. She refused, preferring to stand and face whatever was coming. He told her that they needed to speak with the woman in the photographs, that they needed to understand the full situation. Camilla's protective instincts flared. She would not allow them to harass or intimidate someone she cared about deeply. She informed Harrison that the woman was a childhood friend, someone she had known long before joining the royal family. They had reconnected years ago and had maintained a close friendship ever since. The hidden room and secret entrance were necessary because the palace environment made genuine privacy impossible. Every visitor was logged, every interaction monitored and analyzed. She had wanted one space where she could be herself without judgment or scrutiny. Harrison listened carefully, taking notes but also trying to understand the human element of the situation. He had to ask the difficult question about the nature of their relationship. Were they simply friends, or was there something more? Camilla met his gaze steadily and told him that what happened in her private life was her concern alone, as long as it posed no security risk to the crown or country. The commander acknowledged her point, but explained that the unauthorized entrance itself was a security risk. Anyone could have discovered it and used it for harmful purposes. She had compromised palace security, even if unintentionally. There would have to be consequences, investigations, and reports filed. The matter was now beyond his control alone. Camilla knew he was right, but she also knew she had to protect her friend. She requested that before any reports were filed or investigations launched, she be allowed to speak with the king's chief advisor directly. She wanted to explain the situation herself, to control the narrative before rumors and speculation filled in the gaps. Harrison considered this request. It was reasonable and might actually help contain the situation. He agreed to delay his formal report for 24 hours, giving her time to speak with Lord Pemberton. But the hidden door would be sealed immediately, and guards would be posted to ensure no one used the passage until the investigation was complete. Camilla accepted these terms. She had one day to figure out how to protect both her privacy and her position. As the officers began the process of securing the hidden entrance, Camilla retreated to her sitting area. She needed to think clearly and plan carefully. Her secret was out, at least among a small group of people. How it would spread and what damage it would cause remained to be seen. She had to find a way to control the story before it controlled her. The rest of that morning passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Camilla dismissed her staff early, claiming a headache, which was not entirely untrue. Her head pounded with stress and lack of sleep. She spent hours composing herself, practicing what she would say to Lord Pemberton. The old advisor was shrewd and had seen every kind of scandal the palace could produce. She needed to appeal to both his sense of duty and his humanity. By afternoon, she had secured an emergency meeting with Pemberton in his private office. The walk through the palace corridors felt longer than usual. Servants and staff members she passed seemed to look at her differently, though that was likely her imagination. The security team had been sworn to confidentiality, but she knew how quickly secrets spread in this place. Walls had ears, and loyalty often crumbled under the weight of good gossip. Lord Pemberton's office was exactly as she remembered it from previous meetings. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books lining the walls, and a massive desk that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. The old lord stood when she entered, offering a slight bow that protocol demanded. His eyes, however, showed concern rather than the usual diplomatic neutrality. He already knew something was wrong. Camilla took the seat across from him, folding her hands in her lap to stop them from shaking. Pemberton sat down slowly, his aged joints protesting the movement. He waited for her to speak first. a tactical choice that put the burden of explanation on her shoulders. She appreciated his directness. There was no point in small talk or dancing around the issue. She began by acknowledging that Commander Harrison had discovered something unusual during a security inspection of her chamber. She explained about the hidden door and the private room beyond it, taking full responsibility for having it installed without proper authorization. Pemberton's expression remained neutral, but she noticed his fingers tightening slightly on the arms of his chair. Unauthorized modifications to palace structure were serious violations. Then she told him about the photographs and about her friend. She chose her words carefully, describing a friendship that had sustained her through the loneliness and pressure of royal life. She spoke of needing a space where she could be authentic, where she did not have to perform or maintain the perfect image expected of her position. Pemberton listened without interruption, his experienced ears catching every nuance and implication in her words. When she finished, silence filled the room. The old lord stood and walked to his window, looking out at the palace gardens below. His back remained turned to her as he processed everything she had shared. Camilla waited, her heart hammering in her chest. This man held enormous influence over the royal household. His recommendation would likely determine her fate. Finally, Pemberton spoke, his voice measured and thoughtful. He acknowledged the security breach was serious and could not be overlooked. However, he also understood the unique pressures of royal life and the human need for genuine connection. The question now was how to handle this situation in a way that protected both the institution and the individuals involved. He turned to face her, his weathered face showing a hint of sympathy. He asked her directly about the nature of her relationship with this woman. Was it simply friendship or something deeper? Camilla had known this question would come, but hearing it spoken aloud still made her chest tighten. She took a deep breath and chose honesty over evasion. She told him that her feelings went beyond ordinary friendship, that this woman understood and accepted her in ways no one else did. They had found comfort and joy in each other's company over the years. She did not label it or try to define it in conventional terms, but she made it clear that this relationship was important and meaningful to her. Pemberton returned to his desk and sat heavily. He admitted that this complicated matters significantly. The royal family's public image was carefully managed, and any suggestion of controversy could damage the institution's reputation. However, times were changing and public attitudes were evolving. The challenge was navigating this situation without causing unnecessary harm or scandal. He asked about the woman in question. Who was she? What was her background? Could she be trusted to remain discreet? Camilla provided the information readily. Her friend Victoria came from a respectable but non-aristocratic family. She worked as an art historian and lived a quiet, private life. She had no interest in publicity or exploiting her connection to royalty. In fact, she had been reluctant about the relationship from the beginning, worried about the complications it could cause. Pemberton made notes as Camilla spoke, his mind clearly working through various scenarios and solutions. He asked if anyone else knew about this relationship. Camilla admitted that a few trusted staff members had helped arrange discreet meetings over the years, but they had been well compensated for their silence. Pemberton frowned at this admission. Financial incentives for secrecy created vulnerabilities. People could always be paid more by others seeking information. The advisor leaned back in his chair, studying Camilla with eyes that had witnessed decades of royal dramas. He told her that they had three options. First, they could deny everything, claim the hidden room was for general privacy purposes, and cut off all contact with Victoria. This would protect the royal image, but would require Camilla to give up something obviously important to her. Second, they could acknowledge the friendship publicly, but downplay its significance. Present Victoria as a childhood friend, who occasionally visited through informal channels. This middle ground approach might satisfy curiosity without revealing the full truth. However, it required Victoria's cooperation and carried the risk of seeming deceptive if more evidence emerged later. Third, they could be completely honest, acknowledging the depth of the relationship and dealing with whatever public reaction followed. This approach was the riskiest, but also the most authentic. It could make Camilla a figure of sympathy and modernity, or it could create a scandal that damaged the royal family's standing. The outcome was impossible to predict with certainty. Camilla listened to each option, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Each path had consequences, not just for her but for Victoria, for the royal family, and for everyone connected to this situation. She thought about Victoria, who valued her privacy above almost everything else. She thought about her duty to the crown and the institution she served. She thought about the life she wanted to live versus the life she was expected to live. Pemberton did not rush her decision. He understood that some choices could not be made quickly or easily. He suggested she take the evening to consider her options and discuss them with Victoria. They would meet again tomorrow morning, and at that time they would decide on a course of action. The security team would maintain their silence for now, but that silence could not last indefinitely. As Camilla prepared to leave, Pemberton offered one final piece of advice. Whatever she decided, she should choose the path she could live with long-term. Royal life was full of sacrifices and compromises, but some sacrifices were too great. Some compromises destroyed the very things that made life worth living. She needed to protect herself even as she served the institution. Camilla thanked him and left his office, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. She had decisions to make, difficult ones that would shape the rest of her life. But first she needed to speak with Victoria. Her friend deserved to know what was happening, and to have a voice in whatever came next. This situation affected both of them, and they would face it together or not at all. Getting a message to Victoria without using the hidden passage proved more difficult than Camilla anticipated. Every phone call from the palace was logged and monitored. Every visitor was recorded in multiple databases. She finally decided to use a trusted lady-in-waiting, Margaret, who had helped facilitate their meetings in the past. Margaret was older, discreet, and had served the royal household for over 20 years. More importantly, she genuinely cared about Camilla's well-being. Camilla called Margaret to her chamber and explained the situation honestly. The discovery, the confrontation with security, the meeting with Lord Pemberton, and now the impossible decision that lay ahead. Margaret listened with growing concern, her kind eyes reflecting both worry and determination. She agreed immediately to deliver a message to Victoria, suggesting they meet at Margaret's cottage on the palace grounds that evening. The cottage was small but private, and Margaret's presence there would not raise suspicions. As evening approached, Camilla felt her anxiety building to unbearable levels. She changed clothes 3 times, unable to focus on such trivial matters when everything important hung in the balance. Finally, she dressed in simple, casual clothing and wrapped herself in a dark cloak. Margaret guided her through lesser-used corridors to a side exit, avoiding the main halls where other staff members might see them. The walk to Margaret's cottage took only 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The autumn air was cool and carried the scent of dying leaves. Palace grounds that usually felt safe and familiar now seemed exposed and dangerous. Every shadow could hide a photographer or curious staff member. Every sound made Camilla's heart race faster. Victoria was already waiting when they arrived. She stood by the cottage window, her silhouette backlit by the warm interior lights. When she turned and saw Camilla, relief and fear warred on her face. They had not been able to meet for over a week, and the sudden message through Margaret had clearly frightened her. Victoria rushed forward, taking Camilla's hands in her own, searching her face for answers. Margaret excused herself, saying she would keep watch outside and ensure they were not disturbed. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Camilla and Victoria alone in the small, cozy space. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply held on to each other, drawing strength from physical contact. Then Camilla began to explain everything that had happened since yesterday morning. Victoria listened with growing alarm, her face growing paler with each detail. The discovery of the hidden door, the photographs, the security investigation, the meeting with Pemberton. She had always feared this day would come. She had warned Camilla repeatedly that secrets this big could not stay hidden forever. But Camilla had been confident, perhaps too confident, in her precautions. When Camilla finished explaining, Victoria pulled away and walked to the fireplace. She stared into the flames, her arms wrapped around herself as if warding off a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. She asked the question that Camilla had been dreading. What did this mean for them? What would Camilla choose to do? Camilla explained the 3 options Pemberton had outlined. Deny everything and end their relationship. Acknowledge a casual friendship while hiding the truth. Or be completely honest and face whatever consequences followed. Victoria listened to each option, her expression growing more troubled with each one. Victoria turned to face Camilla, and there were tears in her eyes. She said what Camilla had feared she would say. She could not be the reason Camilla's life fell apart. She could not be the scandal that damaged the royal family's reputation. She loved Camilla too much to cause her that kind of pain and turmoil. Perhaps they should choose the first option, painful as it was, and end things before the situation got worse. Camilla felt something break inside her chest. She crossed the room quickly, taking Victoria's face in her hands. She told her that she had spent her entire life doing what was expected, what was proper, what served the institution. She had sacrificed personal happiness for duty more times than she could count. But this relationship was the one thing she could not sacrifice. Victoria had brought light and joy into a life that had been gray and lonely. Victoria pulled back, shaking her head. She reminded Camilla of the realities they faced. The scrutiny, the judgment, the potential backlash from conservative elements. Camilla had responsibilities and a position to maintain. Victoria had always been willing to remain in the shadows, to be a secret part of Camilla's life because she understood the constraints of royal existence. But now that their secret was out among security and advisors, those shadows were no longer safe. Camilla argued that times were changing, that society was becoming more accepting and understanding. There would be challenges, certainly, but there would also be support. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of living a partial life. She wanted the chance to be authentic, even if that authenticity came with a price. But Victoria countered that it was not just about them. There were other people to consider. The royal family's reputation affected national unity and international relations. Staff members who had helped them could face consequences for their involvement, and Victoria herself, who valued privacy above almost everything, would be thrust into a spotlight she never wanted. Her quiet life would be destroyed, examined and picked apart by media and public alike. They argued back and forth, their voices rising with emotion and frustration. Love and duty, authenticity and responsibility, personal happiness and public service. These conflicts had no easy answers, no perfect solutions. Every choice involved loss and pain. The only question was which losses they could bear, and which would break them completely. Eventually, their argument gave way to tears and exhaustion. They sat together on the small sofa, holding each other as they had done countless times before. But this time felt different. There was a finality in the air, a sense that whatever they decided tonight would determine not just their immediate future, but the entire trajectory of their lives. Victoria spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She told Camilla that she needed to make this decision based on what was best for her own life and position. Victoria would support whatever Camilla chose, even if that choice meant separation. But Victoria could not be the one to make this decision. It was too important, too consequential. Camilla had to choose her own path. Camilla realized that Victoria was right. This was her decision to make, and avoiding it would only make things worse. She thought about the life she had lived so far, always careful, always controlled, always performing for others. She thought about the life she wanted, where she could be genuine and open about who she was and what mattered to her. She thought about growing old with regrets versus growing old with pride in her choices. She looked at Victoria, really looked at her, studying the face she had come to know and love so well. This woman had asked for nothing except the chance to know and be known. She had never sought attention or privilege. She had simply offered love and acceptance without conditions. Could Camilla walk away from that? Should she? The candles in the cottage burned low as they talked through the night. They discussed worst-case scenarios and best-case possibilities. They talked about strength and fear, courage and caution. Margaret brought them tea at some point, but neither could remember drinking it. Time lost meaning as they wrestled with the most important decision of their lives. As dawn approached, Camilla had not reached a final decision, but she had gained clarity. Whatever she chose, she would not let fear be the deciding factor. She had lived too much of her life afraid of judgment and consequences. If she was going to make a sacrifice, it would be a conscious choice based on love and wisdom, not cowardice and convention. She kissed Victoria goodbye as the sun began to rise over the palace grounds. They would see each other again soon, one way or another. But first, Camilla had to return to her chamber, face herself in the mirror and decide what kind of person she wanted to be. Not what kind of royal, but what kind of human being. Camilla barely slept after returning to her chamber. She watched the sunrise through her windows. the golden light slowly illuminating the familiar room that suddenly felt like a cage. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully chosen decoration represented the life she had built within the constraints of royal duty. But what did any of it matter if she could not be herself within these walls? She spent the morning alone, refusing breakfast and dismissing her staff. She needed silence to think, space to feel the full weight of her decision. By noon, she had made her choice. It was not the safe choice or the expected choice, but it felt right in a way that nothing else had in years. She called Lord Pemberton's office and requested an immediate meeting. This time, when she walked through the palace corridors, she held her head high. Her hands did not shake. Her steps were steady and purposeful. She had spent too many years being afraid, too many years hiding essential parts of herself. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity and honesty. Pemberton received her in the same office as before. He looked tired, as if he too had spent the night wrestling with this situation. He gestured for her to sit, but she chose to stand. She needed to deliver her decision on her own 2 feet, strong and certain. She told him she had chosen the third option. Complete honesty. She would acknowledge her relationship with Victoria publicly, explain why she had felt the need to hide it, and accept whatever consequences followed. She understood this decision might cost her position and standing. She understood it would create controversy and uncomfortable conversations. But she could no longer live a lie, no matter how comfortable or convenient that lie might be. Pemberton listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked if she was absolutely certain. This path could not be reversed once begun. The media would dissect every aspect of her life and relationship. There would be cruel comments and harsh judgments. Some members of the royal family might distance themselves from her. Was she prepared for all of that? Camilla met his gaze steadily. She told him that she had spent her entire life being prepared for everything, except being herself. She was tired of preparation and performance. She was ready to simply exist as she was, flaws and authenticity included. If that was unacceptable to the institution, then perhaps she did not belong in the institution. The old advisor nodded slowly, a hint of respect crossing his weathered features. He admitted that her courage surprised him. Most people in her position chose the easy path, the safe path, but perhaps the institution needed people who were willing to stand for something beyond tradition and appearance. Perhaps it was time for the royal family to reflect the reality of the modern world, rather than clinging to outdated ideals. He told her that he would support her decision and help manage the announcement. They would need to craft a careful statement, prepare for media questions, and coordinate with other members of the royal family. It would be a complex process, but he would guide her through it. However, there was one condition. She had to speak with Victoria and ensure they were truly united in this decision. Both of them would face the scrutiny and consequences. Both of them needed to be ready. Camilla had already considered this requirement. She arranged to meet Victoria that afternoon at Margaret's cottage again. This time, when Victoria arrived, Camilla's demeanor was different. There was a peace about her, a resolution that had been absent the night before. Victoria noticed immediately and asked what had happened. Camilla took Victoria's hands and told her about the decision she had made. She explained that she was choosing honesty, choosing them, choosing a life that reflected her truth rather than others' expectations. But she emphasized that this was only possible if Victoria agreed. She would not force this exposure on someone who valued privacy so deeply. If Victoria could not accept a public relationship, Camilla would understand and choose a different path. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they were different tears. She told Camilla that she had spent the entire night thinking too. She had realized that hiding their relationship, even for good reasons, had been its own kind of sacrifice. She had accepted the shadows because she thought that was the only way to keep Camilla in her life. But shadows were cold and lonely places. If Camilla was willing to step into the light to claim their relationship publicly despite the risks, then Victoria would stand beside her. She was terrified of the attention and judgment that would follow. But she was more terrified of losing Camilla, of watching her continue to live a half-life of pretense and performance. They would face whatever came together. They held each other, crying and laughing simultaneously, feeling the enormous relief of finally making a decision after so much agonizing uncertainty. Margaret knocked softly and entered, bringing tea and practical wisdom. She reminded them that there would be difficult days ahead, but there would also be freedom and authenticity. Sometimes the hardest path led to the most meaningful destination. Over the next few days, preparations began for the announcement. Lord Pemberton worked with Palace communications staff to draft a statement. It acknowledged Camilla's long friendship with Victoria and explained that their relationship had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful over the years. The statement emphasized that this relationship posed no security threat and had always been conducted with discretion and respect for Palace protocols, except for the unauthorized entrance which Camilla took full responsibility for installing. The statement was reviewed multiple times, with careful attention to tone and phrasing. It needed to be honest without being sensational, clear without being overly detailed. Pemberton also arranged private meetings between Camilla and senior members of the royal family. These conversations were difficult and emotional. Some family members were supportive, some were confused, and some were openly disapproving. The king himself met with Camilla in his private study. He was a man of traditional values who had always expected his family to maintain certain standards and appearances. But he was also pragmatic and intelligent enough to understand that times were changing. He told Camilla that he did not fully understand her choices, but he respected her courage in making them. The royal family would stand behind her, though there would likely be consequences and adjustments to her role and duties. Camilla thanked him, grateful for his support, even if it came with reservations. She had not expected unanimous approval or understanding. She had only hoped for the chance to be honest and the freedom to define her own life within the constraints that remained. The announcement was scheduled for the following Monday morning. Palace Communications would release the statement simultaneously to all major media outlets. Camilla would not give interviews or answer questions immediately. The statement would speak for itself, and the palace would maintain that this was a private matter that deserved respect and dignity rather than sensationalism. As Monday approached, Camilla felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. She was about to step off a cliff without knowing what lay at the bottom, but she was also about to stop living in fear, stop hiding essential parts of herself. Whatever happened next, it would happen in the light rather than the shadows. Victoria moved into a secure location temporarily, as security experts predicted she would face immediate media attention. Photographers and reporters would descend on her home and workplace, desperate for quotes and images. The palace arranged protection for her, acknowledging that as someone connected to a royal family member, she deserved basic security and privacy protections. Sunday night, Camilla barely slept again. But this time, her sleeplessness came from nervous energy rather than anguish. Tomorrow, everything would change. Her secret would become public knowledge. Her private life would become public discussion. But she would finally be able to walk through the world as herself, whole and authentic rather than fragmented and hidden. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and persistent rain, as if the weather itself reflected the gravity of what was about to happen. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Palace Communications Office released the statement to all major news outlets simultaneously. Within minutes, the story spread across the internet like wildfire. News websites crashed from traffic. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from supportive to hostile. The story dominated every news cycle across multiple countries. Camilla watched the initial coverage from her chamber, accompanied by Margaret and a palace advisor, monitoring media responses. The television showed her official photograph beside speculation and commentary from various experts and commentators. Some praised her courage and authenticity. Others questioned her judgment and fitness for royal duties. Many simply expressed shock that such a secret had been kept for so long within the palace walls. The photographs from the hidden room had not been released, protecting some measure of privacy. But reporters quickly identified Victoria, digging into her background and publishing details about her work and life. Old photographs surfaced, showing Camilla and Victoria together at various public events over the years. What had seemed like innocent friendship photos now took on new significance in light of the revelation. Victoria watched the coverage from her secure location, feeling violated despite the palace's efforts to protect her. Strangers were discussing her most private feelings and relationships on national television. Her phone was bombarded with calls from reporters offering money for interviews. Her neighbors were being questioned. Her workplace was under siege from photographers. The life she had carefully built away from attention had evaporated overnight. By afternoon, the palace was receiving thousands of messages. Some expressed support and congratulations. Others demanded Camilla's removal from her position. Religious groups organized protests. LGBTQ advocacy organizations praised her for visibility and representation. Politicians weighed in with carefully neutral statements. The world had opinions about Camilla's private life, and everyone seemed determined to share them. International reaction proved more complex than anticipated. Some countries expressed support, viewing the announcement as progressive and modern. Others, particularly those with conservative social values, questioned the royal family's moral standing. Diplomatic relationships that had taken years to build suddenly required careful management and reassurance. Through it all, Camilla maintained her composure publicly. She did not respond to individual criticisms or attacks. She did not give impromptu interviews or issue clarifications. The statement stood as her truth, and she refused to apologize or elaborate beyond what had already been shared. Lord Pemberton coordinated responses to official inquiries, always emphasizing respect for privacy while acknowledging the public interest. By the end of the first week, the initial frenzy began to settle into a sustained but less hysterical level of interest. Deeper analysis pieces appeared, examining changing social attitudes and the challenges of maintaining relevant monarchies in modern democracies. Some commentators argued that Camilla's honesty might actually strengthen the institution by showing its ability to evolve. Others maintained that royal families existed to uphold traditional values and that this situation represented a fundamental betrayal of that purpose. Camilla was removed from several ceremonial positions by mutual agreement with senior royals. These were roles that required representing traditional family values, and it was acknowledged that her presence might prove controversial in those contexts. However, she retained other duties focused on arts, education, and charity work. The palace framed this as a natural evolution of her role rather than a punishment or demotion. Victoria slowly adjusted to her new reality. The initial media siege lessened as other news stories competed for attention. She returned to work under new security arrangements. Though her life would never be quite as private or peaceful as before, she had to develop strategies for declining interviews and managing unwanted attention. But she also discovered unexpected support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who reached out with kindness and understanding. 2 months after the announcement, Camilla and Victoria were finally able to meet properly without hiding or subterfuge. They chose a quiet weekend at a countryside estate that the palace made available to them. It was the first time they could simply be together without fear or secrecy, though security personnel maintained a discreet presence on the grounds. They walked through gardens in the autumn sunshine, talking about everything that had happened, the chaos, the stress, the attacks, and the support. Victoria admitted that there were moments when she had regretted the decision, when the invasion of her privacy felt unbearable. But those moments were outweighed by the relief of finally living honestly. No more hidden passages, no more elaborate deceptions, no more constant fear of discovery. Camilla confessed her own struggles. The disappointment from some family members hurt more than she had anticipated. The hostile reactions from strangers were sometimes shocking in their cruelty. She had lost friendships and professional relationships, but she had also discovered who her true allies were. She had learned the difference between people who loved the idea of her versus people who loved her actual self. They discussed the future, which now felt both more uncertain and more hopeful than before. Marriage was not legally possible for them in their position, but they could build a life together openly. They could attend events together, travel together, and simply exist together without pretense. The palace was developing new protocols to accommodate their relationship within the broader context of royal duties and appearances. Margaret visited them that weekend, bringing news from the palace and the comfort of her steady presence. She told them that public opinion was gradually shifting. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cautious acceptance from many people. Younger generations especially seemed supportive, viewing their relationship as normal and unremarkable. Time, as always, was helping to normalize what had initially seemed scandalous. Lord Pemberton sent a message through Margaret as well. He wanted them to know that despite the challenges and controversies, He believed they had done the right thing. The institution had needed to confront its own assumptions and prejudices. Their courage had forced necessary conversations about authenticity, privacy, and what royal service meant in the modern world. It had not been comfortable, but growth rarely was. 6 months after the announcement, a major public event required Camilla's attendance. It was a charity gala for causes she had long supported. Everyone knew Victoria would accompany her. This would be their first major public appearance together since the revelation. Photographers and media outlets prepared extensively for the moment. Camilla dressed carefully, choosing an elegant but understated gown. Victoria wore a classic suit that conveyed confidence and dignity. They arrived together, stepping out of the car into a barrage of camera flashes. For a moment, the attention was overwhelming, but then Camilla took Victoria's hand and they walked forward together into the event. The room fell silent when they entered, hundreds of eyes watching their every move. Then someone began to applaud. Others joined in. Not everyone, certainly, but enough that the sound filled the space. It was not a standing ovation or an overwhelming show of support. It was simply acknowledgement, recognition that they had the courage to be present and authentic despite the costs. Throughout the evening, they navigated conversations and interactions with grace. Some people were warm and welcoming. Others were polite but distant. A few avoided them entirely, but they were there together, open and honest, no longer hiding in shadows or pretending to be something they were not. As the evening ended and they prepared to leave, Camilla reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the discovery, the difficult decisions, and the consequences. She thought about the life she had lived before, safe but constrained, and the life she was building now, uncertain but authentic. She looked at Victoria, who was smiling despite her exhaustion from the evening's social demands. This woman had stood beside her through everything, had been willing to sacrifice her own privacy and peace for the chance to be together openly. That kind of love and commitment deserved to be honored, not hidden. They returned to the palace that night, not to separate chambers with hidden passages, but to shared quarters that the family had quietly approved. There would be more challenges ahead, more adjustments and compromises. Public opinion would continue to evolve in unpredictable ways. Some people would never accept them or approve of their relationship. But as they settled in for the night, talking quietly about the evening and making plans for the days ahead, Camilla felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of hiding and avoiding conflict, but the deeper peace of living with integrity and truth. She had paid a price for this peace, as had Victoria. But it was a price they had chosen to pay with open eyes and willing hearts. The hidden door in her old chamber had been sealed and plastered over, its entrance removed from palace records as if it had never existed. But Camilla did not need hidden passages anymore. She had found something better, something more sussed.